and so we'll have about 45 minutes of presentations, and then we'll have 20 or 25 minutes for us to have a good discussion. Bring your questions. We'll put them into the chat, and then we will have a few announcements at the end. And if folks have some burning announcements, our members, please feel free to put them in the chat as well at that point, and we can unmute you too. So with that, I'm going to just introduce, we've got Aaron Gunderson, who is the Executive Director of Passive House Massachusetts, will start us off. And then we'll have Julie Klump, who is Vice President of Design and Building Performance at Preservation of Affordable Housing, or POA. And then we'll finish it off with Michelle Apigian, who is an Associate Principal at Icon Architecture. So we're so excited, and I think we'll just kick it over to Aaron to start us off and talk about Passive House for affordable housing. And please, again, put your questions into the chat so that we might be able to answer them as we go. And then if there's, for the larger Q&A, we'll reserve time to make sure we get your questions answered. And Lauren Bauman will be facilitating that. So thank you all, and take it away, Aaron.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone, for setting up this session. I'm so thrilled to see everybody here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. All right. So everyone should be able to see this here now. As Emily said, I'm Aaron Gunderson with Passive House Massachusetts, and this is the Passive House for Affordable Housing Developers session. Like I said, thrilled to have you guys here. This session is in part being put on through the Mass Save's Passive House training program. So some of the content that me and Michelle and Julie were able to develop is in part sponsored by the sponsors of Mass Save. They, starting a couple years ago, introduced this training program along with an incentive program. We put on a lot of courses through this. Several of them were actually sent out in advance to folks on this. So if you watch some of the Passive House 101s or some of the other videos that were sent out ahead of time, they were also put on through this session. There's been a lot of great content that's been made available through this. We're going to be working to do this for the next few years as well. So hopefully there'll be a lot more content available. But I do want to acknowledge Mass Save for doing this. And I want to bring up the incentives that they've been able to offer. These have also been on the table for a couple of years now, but these are incentives for mid and high-rise projects. So basically any residential building of 5 units or more qualifies for these financial incentives through Mass Save. And these are them out there. You may have seen these in other sessions. You may have seen them before, but I just want to be clear and make sure everyone knows what's available for all of your projects. They recently did increase these in terms of the number of units. It used to be, I think you had to be 4 stories or higher, regardless of the number of units. Now it's simply 5 units. So a few more projects that were not able to be eligible before are now eligible. The biggest one on here is the feasibility study coming at the beginning. They will cover up to 100% of the costs of a feasibility study. So even if you're not 100% sure your project is something you want to go to Passive House with, it's worth exploring and worth conducting that feasibility study at the beginning stage. In fact, for all your projects, I would recommend taking Mass Save up on this offer and going through that feasibility study. They also cover energy modeling costs, as you see, and then they'll do pre-certification costs. So rather than having to wait until the project's finished to get some of the funding, you can go through the pre-certification phase and actually receive $500 per unit right away. And then after certification, you actually can get the rest there. The other interesting thing about this that I'll point out that I get questions about sometimes is that net performance bonus. That piece is meant for two cases. The first is for projects that go for certification, but don't quite meet it. You can still earn some incentives, and that net performance bonus is how you get some incentives. So even if you strive for Passive House and say you miss your blower door test or something and don't quite get there, you can still receive some incentives. So it's still worthwhile to try. And then the other case is if you not only achieve certification, but your performance is well above what that minimum Passive House standard requires, you're going to receive even an increased incentives. So that net performance bonus is kind of a great addition to these incentives. Currently in the Mass Save program, these are the latest numbers we've received from them. There's been over 7,000 units that have registered through this program. So we've seen dramatic dramatic growth. You can kind of see starting off this last year, 2020, 101 units. Then you can see every year kind of going up, and projecting that by 2024, we'll have 7,110 units, which is fantastic. So this has been a huge success. We're really excited to see the growth in multifamily. And the reality is a lot of these multifamily units are also affordable projects. That's where we've seen a lot of this growth. So it's not just market rate. We're seeing a lot of affordable projects go through this as well. In addition to these incentives through Mass Save, there's been a lot of other kind of movement with Passive House around the state. So I want to just highlight a few things of where we're seeing Passive House show up. The first one up there is at the state level through their affordable housing financing. I'm going to actually mention this on a separate slide here, so I'll skip over that for a moment. But on kind of the local level, we've seen a few different cities incorporate this. So Boston has included Passive House in their new design standards. So the Department of Neighborhood Development has included there as a method for large buildings to meet their zero emission building standards. Somerville's including it in a zoning ordinance. So Passive House actually qualifies for density bonuses in some areas of the city. Cambridge was included in a zoning ordinance as well as an alternative pathway. And in Newton, we've seen it actually involved in a few ways. Their climate action plan at the town levels incorporated it. We've seen a local community group really push it. And we've some large market rate projects like Northland, which is going to include some affordable units as well, really be excited about this and go for Passive House in large part because of the way the city's been pushing it. At the state level, the latest climate bill that passed a few months ago is requiring the development of a net zero stretch code. And we're working to make sure that that net zero stretch code incorporates a lot of aspects of Passive House projects. It's really one of the main benefits of Passive House for net zero is that it sets up buildings to be net zero. It creates that pathway. So this stretch code is coming down the line and will incorporate a lot of elements of Passive House, hopefully, as we work on it. And then lastly, those Mass Save incentives, as you said. So I mentioned I was going to come back to this one. So I do. These are the DHCD's low-income housing program. So for the QAP process, as I'm sure you're all familiar, but they award 5 extra points for Passive House. So if you have a project that you're going for Passive House certification for, 5 extra points under the exemplary energy performance, which is great. As you can see how that compares to LEED or enterprise green communities, which get bonus points as well, but not quite 5. This was modeled after successful programs in other states. Those of you who have seen presentations we put on over the last several years have seen some of the sessions on like Pennsylvania, for example, that we presented that they did down there with their QAP process, which saw a huge growth in Passive House as a result. This was kind of modeled after a lot of those initiatives. So we're really excited that it exists. This is for 2020 to 2021. So the 2022 plan is currently being worked on right now. A draft has been out. I believe the comment period for that is over, but they're still sort of drafting the final plan. But we're hoping this will be sort of an even stronger component of the new one. And then just sort of restate some of the benefits of Passive House. A lot of this is going to be, you'll see this in Julie and Michelle's presentations. And if you've watched all the other ones that were sent out, you've heard me and others talk about this. But I just bring this up to make sure that when we think about Passive House, when we talk about the benefits of Passive House, we're not just focused on energy use and carbon reduction. Those are obviously key points and probably the biggest reasons we're doing this. But there's lots of other benefits that Passive House buildings achieve, especially for the tenants who live there. They see an improvement in air quality and health and comfort in the building, greater durability, resilience to major weather events. The room can stay warm or cool for a lot longer if the power goes out, for example. There's also quieter acoustic conditions and, of course, lower operating costs. So lots of these other benefits that I want to make sure we keep in mind as we talk about Passive House buildings, even when we talk a lot about energy use and maybe cost is kind of the main things. The last one there, pathway to net zero. So this sort of leads into what Passive House Massachusetts is working on right now. Over this year, we've been focused on a campaign promoting Passive House plus renewables equals net zero energy. Really, this is all around framing all this work the state's doing to develop this net zero code to make sure that we understand that we can't simply get to net zero with renewables alone. We don't have enough space for all the renewable energy it takes for typical buildings to become net zero. So by focusing on Passive House, by focusing on that energy reduction first that Passive House achieves, it allows us to get to that net zero energy that's so critical for the state to those climate goals. So we're focusing on this at our monthly presentations. Many of you have been to them. They're the second Tuesday of every month. So our next one is coming up in July, and it'll also keep building on this theme. So feel free to keep attending those. Lastly, I want to hit on a little bit of cost. I want to give a shout out to Beverly Craig from Mass CC, who just sent me this slide before the presentation. So thank you. And I was able to include it. But this is going over those Philadelphia, so in Pennsylvania, where they have that QAP process first, they had this huge growth in passive house building. So in Philadelphia, this is kind of the cost comparison, or sorry, the energy performance comparison. So you can see the code buildings all the way on the right in blue, their energy performance is on average around 60 in terms of EUI. But then you can see LEED stepping it down a little bit to 47, but honestly not that much of a reduction. But then you get those FIAS buildings, which are the passive house projects, all the way down to around a 27. So this is where we're able to see that proven performance in energy reduction, not simply model. We're able to see it actually happen. Many of you have seen the cost slides from these projects in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania through this, where the costs are about even, if not 1 to 2% more for the affordable projects, but really close to being even. And we're seeing that shape out to be not even in performance, being a huge reduction in passive house for performance. So this is fantastic. This is what we want to see in Massachusetts, and why this presentation, all of you here, is so critical. Lastly, I'll mention our video library, where we have a lot of great content. And one of those sessions that you may want to watch is this Affordable Housing Design Manual done by Tim McDonald from Onion Flats, who was responsible for a lot of those Philadelphia projects we just saw the cost or the performance comparison of. So check out this session and a lot of others on our video library to get more information after today. But that's all I have. Thank you so much for being here. Here's the contact information of Passive House Mass. Stay in touch with us with all your questions. I'm going to be in the chat room as well, answering questions with all of you. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and Julie.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And I think we'll have Julie take it away next.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here, coming to you live from West Texas. It's almost 100 degrees out there. I don't know what it is there, but nice and toasty here. You know, I could talk about passive house all day. It's just seems like the obvious way to build now that we sort of have figured it out. I just want to touch on how we finally got in the ground with the project, and maybe highlight one way that we finally got there, and how we're, you know, just as we're starting construction, how we're really sort of keeping up with things. And I think Michelle's going to touch on a little bit of that in construction. Bartlett, I want to just highlight, that's our first shot at being all electric, and some, you know, challenges that we're facing with one of the systems that we're trying to put in place there. And then Salem Heights, which is a near passive house, deep energy retrofit. So just want to highlight some of this, and hopefully it's, you know, maybe a little inspiration, maybe it sort of will, you know, kick off some good dialogue about what folks are thinking about in passive house.
You might have to click on
my slides.
Yeah, you might have to click on your slide again. Like actually.
There we go.
Mouse.
There we go. So I know we're talking about Massachusetts. I just want to throw out there, this is where POA has projects. The green states have passive house buildings. In Massachusetts alone, we have the project I'm going to touch on briefly under construction. We have 2 starting this summer, committed to passive house, and then we have 2 starting design. So we'll have 5 projects underway in the next year or so in Massachusetts. And the project in DC is actually the first 100 units of over 1,000 units that we're committed to build passive house. So we're trying to do this in different places. Massachusetts is, you know, fortunately there's been some real leaders that have pushed this so that we're able to do it, and we're kind of learning as we go, and glad to be able to share it. So these are some renderings of those buildings. And what I put on here is to highlight sort of, one thing is that they don't necessarily look like what people might guess to be a passive house building or a rectangular box. They're actually, I think, really nice designs. And I highlighted on each of the renderings where we are in terms of any fossil fuel. So you can see we have some that we're really pushing to be 100% electric, and some that we've actually had to, am I breaking up? Is it okay? Okay. that we've actually had to use gas, domestic hot water. And I can talk a little bit about that in terms of why we had to make that hard choice. So like Aaron said, you know, we want to do passive house because we get this robust enclosure that does so many things in terms of tenant comfort, health, resilient design. It allows us to put in really low load heating and cooling, creates that low demand. We can get to all electric ventilation systems. Domestic hot water, again, it's a question mark. And then what we're really trying to do is on the backup powers, we're really trying to implement solar storage where we can. And then of course the barriers, cost versus electric. In the project that we just broke ground on, or actually we're into it several months, when we looked at it with our engineer, we designed it to be all electric. And there was a 240% difference annually in what we would have had to pay. So for us to heat our water with gas, it was just under $13,000 a year. For us to use electricity, it was almost $44,000 a year. And so we just can't really burden our operational cost with that yet, even though the next project that's going up in Boston is going to be all electric. So the way that we got to being in the ground on a project and we sort of took it really slow and had time and felt like what we needed to do was to really spend a lot of time. We brought a GC on early for pre-construction. We did enclosure training. We had estimating training. We had mechanical training. And this was not only for engineers and architects, because not everybody is up to speed as maybe Icon in terms of designing these buildings, but there are things that we had to demystify. So the mechanical subs, you know, they see, you know, per floor ERVs, and it's not something they're used to. So the cost goes up $1 million. And then when we explain to them that we've gotten rid of all the vertical shafts and we've shrunk the ductwork because it doesn't have to travel as far, bring air as far, then it goes back down $1 million. So there were just some real, you know, key points during our training that we could really see. And we spent a lot of time looking at numbers and pricing different things. And really what came of all that training was that we just needed to explain to people what we were doing and that it was still an enclosure, it was still a window. And the training also was able to highlight some things that made building the building better and easier, even though the sequence, and that's been one of the big lessons for us starting construction, is that we've had to do things in a little bit different sequence, which is only just a learning exercise for the GC. So we use somebody to do, you know, do all this training. They're now involved with training. We just had a big training with the framers on site on Monday, just walking through some of the details they'll see. And, you know, the PT slab edge and the exterior wall, details like that were gone over. We're planning some real, you know, we promised, and we're planning a lot of diagnostic blower door tests so that we can identify things that might slip through the cracks. No pun intended in terms of air tightness. And, you know, just a couple photos of, you know, in construction, we're panelizing the exterior wall, and these are going in over the PT slab. And then on the right is our mock-up, and we did window test, air and water window tests on that this week, just to sort of make sure that we've got the flashing correct and any caulking that we need. So this project is one that should start this summer. It's 55 units, senior light, 55 plus. Which makes me feel kind of old, but it's all electric. It's our first shot at all electric in Boston. We've got a design, fantastic design for solar storage backup. We've got a 90 kW PV array. So the other thing about the 90 kW is we need probably 150, maybe 160 kW production. And so we're going to be short, but we're going to research how to use some offsite capacity in order to bring this building to net zero. And we haven't gotten into those details yet. So we don't know if that's something that we're going to be able to afford to do, but at least we know that if we can get to all electric, you know, it'll help our decarbonization strategies and also give us a real model for all right, this is the best way to buy offsite in order to fill that gap. The interesting thing is when we were all gung-ho about our solar storage system. And so our construction person sent an email, because we had our building permit submitted to the city, and sent an email out and said, okay, so we want to just bring this up, that we really would like to do this instead of the fossil fuel generator. And her phone started ringing off the wall. And she finally took a call, and she couldn't keep up with the notes and all the concerns. And a lot of these concerns are valid, but unfortunately, a lot of the concerns were based on a video that was on YouTube that showed some battery burning, and I don't know if it caused a lot of damage. But anyways, these are some of their concerns, and you can see that has a lot to do with safety. The image of the graphic of the battery within this container, actually it has its own fire protection system. So there's a lot of ways we're going to be able to allay their concerns. So at the moment, what we're doing is we're putting together a presentation. We're going to use South Mass Clean Energy Center. They work with a retired fire marshal. He's going to help us just really talk to the city through this. Maybe we won't get to do it at Bartlett, but we'll at least help to pave the way in order to get this in, just so we can get to an all electric building, including emergency backup. And then this is a retrofit that we're doing. This is 2 10-story towers. It'll be 281 units. We're going to take over a couple units and do some better amenity space. This is Icons working with us on this. Initially, we thought we were going to reattach all this brick that when it was built in the early 70s, code allowed for it to be supported from the ground up on itself. So there's no relieving angles, there's no control joints. And so when we really started to dig in and do some openings in the brick, we realized that the brick ties, the very infrequent brick ties tying this brick back to the structure, were galvanized and not installed at all. So we had to take the brick down, which is fortunate for the design and building performance team at POA, because we get a chance to really beef up this enclosure. So the brick's coming off. You can see the far right, that's the existing enclosure. So it's a metal stud wall with bad insulation, sheathing, and brick attached or not. In the middle, we're using an armor wall, which is a structural insulated panel, not unlike ZIP, but it has all the fire ratings we need for a high rise. And it also allows for a thermally broken cladding attachment. And we're going to use metal cladding on this building. We're buying a really good window, and we're putting 6 inches of insulation on the roof. So excited about this one. Struggling right now with trying to figure out how to do blower door tests. We have some ideas on doing 3 floors, so we can really isolate a floor. That gets us maybe 50 units. But just in terms of how do we balance the incentives that we think we should get to just help us offset a very expensive project, but very worthwhile in terms of getting this project up to speed in terms of energy efficiency and good indoor air quality. And then the air conditioning and ventilation, it currently, the ventilation system was a rooftop unit that dumped air into a plenum, and likely just made a very fresh air plenum, and very rarely did it drop through a register in front of the door into each unit. And it was designed that way because there's a lot of giant steel beams that sort of block the areas that you might push ductwork in to provide fresh air. So we're taking the leap here on the Minutair system. It's HVAC in a box. There's no outside condenser. And this was a lot of work by Icon team helping us figure out putting this closet against the exterior wall, running ductwork into the unit for fresh air, and also into the unit to exhaust kitchen and bath. And there's a ductwork on the exterior of the building, high and low, that will exhaust and bring fresh air into this Minutair system. The units had through-wall AC, so we've been able to get rid of all the through-wall AC units. So our enclosure is that much better. Residents we put one of these in our management office, which was a former unit, and the management staff couldn't believe how nice and fresh the air. They said the unit, because we didn't even put the unit in a closet, that it was so quiet that it was so easy to use in terms of controls, and that they really felt a real difference in terms of the air quality. So we're excited about that. And then this has me kind of excited. This is a wall mounted PV array. So on the southwest elevations, which this kind of steps back and forward, we have a design for a wall mounted PV array that should get us 116 kW production. We do have some roof, if we can, this is in our base building. If we can have some contingency left over at the end, we'll cover the roof as well. And it's probably not going to touch the total demand for electricity, but it sure is going to make a dent. So we're excited about this project. I think it's going to make a real difference for the residents there and for energy costs. And we'll be able to decommission our cogen, which is a real fossil fuel burner, all for the right reasons, but not necessarily the way we want to heat and cool our buildings. So how close are we to passive house? We'll have to see in terms of what kind of air tightness. We have some real high goals here. So we will hopefully be able to present this project, at least half of it, in a year or so, because we're going to do tower by tower. So that's all I have. I look forward to any questions, conversations about it.
Thank you so much, Julie. And also, we do have one question. Is there a reason the roofs are flat? And tell us more. Is that a solar consideration?
The roof's flat, and it's interesting. This is not a roof that would support solar. We're going to actually have to reinforce the roof. There's steel trusses, and it's actually the wall. Attaching to the wall structurally is easier than it is to the roof, which sounds crazy, but just because of the design of the roof, it was not intended to support anything other than the weight of a membrane. So the roofs have always been flat, and so we're just going to really beef them up with insulation.
And for the other ones that you're designing, do you usually do a flat roof design? The Bartlett and the Mattapan project, is that also for solar consideration?
Not necessarily for solar. It's just we don't need attic space for equipment, and it does create a nice plane for solar.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. Okay, well, I think next we'll go to Michelle, and then make sure that you ask her questions in the chat as we go.
All right. Can everybody hear me and see my screen? Yes? No?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay. Really great to be here. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Aaron, and for everyone who helped put this together. What I want to talk about is how we take intention and turn it into reality. And since I'm an architect with Icon Architecture, we have a lot of visions and dreams, and we try to communicate them in a certain way, but then ultimately they're going to need to be executed by other people and hopefully reviewed by yet other people. And so ensuring that things don't get lost in translation, and at the same time not making things difficult and complicated. So these are the things I'm going to talk about today. I got to click on my screen. So we were fortunate to have a very progressive client who really brought Passive House to us back in mid 2000s, 2008. And ultimately took almost a decade, but we built the Distillery North, which opened in 2017. We also, in the middle there, we just completed, I guess it was last year, mid-COVID, Finch Cambridge, which we're just delighted about. And now I've got another project under construction, Harbor Village in Gloucester, which should be complete like literally any day now, maybe yesterday, but hopefully soon. And at this point, almost a dozen in the queue. And that is supremely exciting. And I would have never been able to predict that a couple of years ago. And Aaron has touched on this, but it's just worth reiterating that part of the reason is because of some really smart people who put a few incentives into place to help ultimately jumpstart what is now, I think, a movement. So it is worth noting that the 2015 IBC that Massachusetts adopted did actually include passive house as an alternative compliance path. That was big. That was big news back then. Didn't move the needle at all, but it was still important. And then what really jump-started things, thank you again, Beverly Craig and the Mass CEC, was the passive house design incentives, which were really targeted specifically to affordable housing. And 8 projects, I believe, were selected and are all either under construction or just about to be under construction. And what that demonstrated for a lot of people who were very keenly interested, but hadn't necessarily, just didn't believe it, was that we could do this. We could do this affordably. We could do it close to cost parity. And that the benefits were actually supremely real, and that we're getting data from that, and that will be ongoing. But that gave inspiration for ultimately the mass save incentives that Aaron spent a good deal of time talking about, and of course now there's the net zero code underway and a lot of other advocacy at all the local levels, and all of that matters because there is no possible way we would have the pipeline we have right now, particularly from the market. And if we did not have that advocacy going on. So please go out, show up, and let them know that this is real and this is what we need. There's no possible way to do it unless you've got teamwork. Just absolutely not. And this is a large team. These are large teams. And it may seem complicated. It's gotten complicated. It's true, but we don't all know everything. We can't all know everything. So we really need to understand who's got the skill set that we need, how are we going to bring them aboard, and make sure that we're covering ourselves at many different layers. And I won't list all of these. I probably am even missing a couple, but it does take a village. It also, interestingly, takes a level of analysis during the design stage that architects are not accustomed to and also not accustomed to doing. And so some of this is about heat transfer. Some of this is about moisture and dew point. What's not on here, but has become actually fundamental to our practice, is early energy modeling. And the feasibility studies that Aaron referenced that the Mass Save program supports, in an ideal world, happen really early. And often a project is in the permitting stages with zoning in a community for many, many months, but might need to have some sense of where they're going before we've even brought most of our engineers officially to the table. And so at Icon, we've got 4 certified passive house consultants and a lot of knowledge transfer going on. And we are doing these feasibility studies now internally so that we can test our assumptions. And, you know, a 3-story, 20-unit building has definite different needs than a 100-unit, 7-story building. And understanding that we're making baseline good assumptions that are going to set us up for success in the future and not bake in a zoning approval that is undermining us is really important. So we have taken it on ourselves to be able to do these. We do dew point analyses. And each of these conditions at the top here is like what was happening in real life in our design, and we wanted to test it because we were worried about it and address it accordingly. Same is very, very true for shading. At Finch, Cambridge, we had started with the assumption, and I just want to say, Julie, absolutely, when we can bring a GC on early to help us evaluate and price and iterate, it's super important. And so we had the benefit of having ENEI on board during early design, and we were assuming that we needed to shade every facade. The building has a very unfortunate orientation, which is largely east-west. And I was really concerned about overheating on those 2 facades. And ultimately, our analysis through modeling showed that adding shading on the east and west did not help us. Yes, it helped overheating, but it did not actually help. It hurt us in the wintertime. And so it was an energy negative. It was an energy nothing, basically. And we therefore were able to VE that out during schematic design because it wasn't appropriate. It didn't make sense. We could have never done that if we didn't have someone helping us test the values, et cetera, and to do the modeling. Most of what I want to talk about is communication, which is just fundamental to our industry. And, you know, there's a lot of different ways we do that. I'm going to start a little bit with the work we are trying to do in our drawings, but also how we think about who is overseeing things in the field, who's responsible for making sure this piece of the equation is consistent and covered, how we deal with reality, which we didn't anticipate sometimes, and how we all try to make sure we're speaking the same language. So one first question that often comes up is, where's the boundary? What's your pressurized envelope? Where's the passive house boundary? And at the distillery, we decided, for reasons I'm not going to dig into, to exclude the stairs and elevator cores from our passive house boundary. So in our drawings, we thought, okay, non-passive house is cool gray. And so you can see cool gray shaded, and it's obviously those are outside the passive house boundary, right? And yes, that was true, but those boundaries were supremely complicated. When we got to Finch, we decided that we needed definitely to do more and that color was appropriate. And in a world where digital drawings are a reality for most and people are walking around with iPads in the field, it actually isn't a big printing issue. Yeah, you might have to print a couple drawings in a set in color, but otherwise super helpful just to add color and to try to use color to help distinguish where it's a compartmentalization component versus a thermal envelope component. You also have to walk through the transitions when these boundaries are not clean 4 square walls on the outside of the building, which very often is just not the case. Don't get me wrong, that simplicity helps, but it's not always easy to make those decisions. And so at the distillery, we had these plan and section elevations, and we identified different elements and tried to show them in a legend, and it wasn't bad. When we got to Finch, we decided, again, we're using color now. And we're not just going to tell you what products, and we were beyond explicit here. I wouldn't actually recommend going this far, but this was necessary for this project. But we also actually listed sequence. We began to actually think about sequence. First, we expect this will happen. If that doesn't happen first, we will not be able to make continuity. So it has to happen first. And by even putting it out there, we give the builder an opportunity to say, wait a minute, that can happen first. I got this guy coming in and he's got to do that first. And then we can rethink it. If we have said, this is the sequence we need, then we can have a conversation. But you do actually need to think about some things to that degree if you want to get it executed properly. We were also at Finch, really pie in the sky, kumbaya here, thinking like, oh yeah, we'll just put up this great signage. We'll tell everybody this is going to be an airtight building. Like, don't poke holes in it. Like, people are going to get it. We're going to do it in lots of languages. I have like no idea if this had any impact or not. Maybe it did. We did have them at every floor, both stairs, every landing, but it made us feel better. What I will say is important though, is having this middle one here, assign one person. Like having someone on site, and it's maybe not only one, because different trades have to come face to face, but you need people to take responsibility for ensuring that the detailing that is necessary is happening at the right time. Otherwise, you're dealing with remediation on a new construction project in particular that is extremely frustrating. So I think that's my key takeaway. The signage was probably just made me feel good. Sometimes it's impossible to even visualize until it's built in real life. And after the fact, we're trying to figure out how to put things together in what order to make the continuities that we need. You can always use a photograph. You can always mark it up. And again, what's the order? What's the order of operations? That is so often what's critical in a passive house project. And now, having in hindsight been doing a lot of that, which is not a place we really want to be. We don't want to be taking photographs of real things and trying to figure it out in the moment. We want to be ahead of it. So we've begun trying to speak the same language, which is to look at the 3-week look ahead and identify anything that's going to touch one of the key transitions or elements to our passive house enclosure or systems, and ensuring that we have a chance to talk through the sequence with all the trades that are relevant on the call. And we've used sometimes it's a half-hour call. We've been doing them every other week. And it's amazing how often someone says, wait a minute, I have to get in there first. And we were like, oh, shoot, we didn't anticipate that. So we have to quickly rethink, but at least we're rethinking before we've set it into stone. And now we're trying to solve a problem. We can actually prevent a problem. And so we have been really articulating what's coming next that matters to us passive house wise. And here is the details that we had in our set, not in axonometric. And here, by the way, now is how we expect it to roll out. Here is the order of operations. And if all the right trades are on the call, I guarantee in half hour or an hour, you have solved this problem. You know that it can be done or not. And if it can't, you've got other options in the queue. Craft. Building is a trade and it's a beautiful thing. And we have long given it a disservice by failing to respect how valuable it is. And every aspect of the trades matters in a passive house. And everyone has a role to play. You don't need to overplay it. You just need to help encourage them to do their job awesome, because it means a lot to you and to the project. So certainly the Carpenters were fundamental. And we had like an all-star team that had never done this before. And boy, did they rock it. And it was super exciting. But insulation is a big deal too. And that's a totally different crew. And, you know, there are lots of different versions of where insulation needed to happen. The plumbers are tied to that because all those penetrations need to be addressed and need to be airtight. You can see that we had to practice and figure out how to get it right. And ultimately, ductwork is like super critical because ventilation is so important. And especially, as Julie was saying, individual versus a central system. Central systems, there's a lot of runs going horizontally and vertically, and balancing all that is tricky. So we need to be able to evaluate that and ensure that they know that we care very much about an airtight system. And then there's the electricians. And sometimes it's a different crew working on the outside than on the inside. And they didn't get the memo that, oh yeah, we don't need to cut the hole like an inch bigger than the outlet. And finally, not to discount, and this is a place where too many projects don't have this oversight, this testing and this verification along the way, because there are just a lot of things that accidentally don't get done right. No one meant to do it wrong, but if we don't test and verify, we don't know. And that can be from an airtightness perspective, that can be from an insulation perspective, and then of course, just systems are working the way you planned. So that could be infrared, that could be sort of visual analysis, blower door testing, but it's all very helpful. QA/QC really matters, and that's one of the things I love about the FIAS setup in particular. But ultimately, I'm going to say this is my closing slide. It's about teamwork. The whole team needs to be on board and be committed to getting through to the finish line. And hopefully having fun while you do it. And with that, I will try to find my Zoom so I can start my share. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Aaron, Julie, and Michelle. So we're going to launch into the Q&A portion of the conversation. So a question from Rachel that just came up for you, Michelle. So about recommendations related to sequencing. So sort of following on what you were just talking about, how you're balancing the input from the architect around that as it relates to the fact that the contractor is really responsible for means and methods. And so how do you navigate that? How do you talk about that in your contracts, right? Is there a contractual way that you're sort of planning for that or accommodating it? You know, how do you make that change happen in a productive and collaborative way?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. No, we've done nothing contractually regarding that at all. We honestly, I think it comes to partnership. The builder has to be our partner. You cannot be at odds with one another and have a successful outcome. You might get it done, but you have to work together. And so I think it's about a very proactive communication that tries to be clear about where it's important for us to be really dialed in, and how we can break that apart so that it's not scary. And so I think it's biting off the right amount at the right time, because the truth is that not every detail happens all at the same moment. And so first of all, try to make it as simple as possible. If it's complicated, you know, between Julie's point about pricing and the fear factor itself. Oh, passive house, gotta be airtight. People they get afraid. But if you just break it down, it's not everything that's critical. There's these 4 places in the building that are going to be critical. This is how we think about it, not means and methods. We're not going to tell you how to do it, but we're going to detail it in a way. And then what we want to make sure, is that they actually paid enough attention to the detail to be able to evaluate whether or not our detail works. Because I'm not a builder, and a lot of times our details just don't work. And maybe it's because we missed something really fundamental, but maybe it's because we just don't understand the sequence that they have in mind. So it's really about talking proactively. That's why I really like the 3-week look ahead, because that's about as far ahead as they can really process this level of conversation. And usually if it's only every few weeks, maybe there's nothing to talk about for a couple of weeks. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
So there's a piece of that, Michelle, that as I listen to it, obviously it's a critical component of a passive house project, but it feels to me like it would be a benefit on any project.
Any project, totally. Absolutely.
Right. There's a question from Jason, and I think this is one that Julie and Michelle, you both probably have some feedback on as it relates to ventilation systems and energy recovery ventilation. So this idea that sometimes we see passive house projects that have 1 per unit, and sometimes we see ones that have, you know, maybe 1 per floor, and then other times we see central systems up on the roof that are supporting all of the units in a building. And, you know, what do you see as the sort of pros or cons of those approaches, and maybe more importantly, the sort of factors in a given project that would lead you down a particular pathway?
Julie, you want to kick that off from an owner perspective?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm surprised we have any mechanical engineers that want to work with us, because and, you know, just back to the question before, I mean, it has to be a collaboration, you know, and we'll have the air barrier rep on site, maybe their engineer, we'll have the GC, we'll have the sub, everybody's talking about, and we might completely reverse a sequence that everyone's like, wait a minute, we've never done it that way, right? But you work together and it comes to that, to a solution that everybody can figure out. On the ERV, so the Minotaur is a unitized system. We have some other buildings where we've done unitized. At Salem, the reason we were sort of like forced into that is just because of the way that we could run ductwork in that building. There were some real challenges there. At Mattapan, we designed central rooftop units, ERVs, with vertical shafts. And when we started looking at the pricing, and we had access to the exterior wall, so the design sort of lent itself to really looking at a per floor system, and it became less expensive for us. So that's why we made the decision there. And that's why we typically start with that design, just like we start with the semi-central domestic hot water system design. That's kind of our base design. And then on some smaller passive house projects on the Cape that we have, it makes so much more sense to use a rooftop unit because it's a smaller amount of units. Now, I don't know if that's always going to be the case, but it may be that there's a balance to the number of units you're serving with fresh air and an ERV recovery that would lean towards a rooftop unit versus a per floor versus a unitized. So it's not really it's a great question. There's not necessarily I can't tell you what triggers one design over the other.
Well, I will say another piece of the equation, two other pieces of the equation. There are certainly space constraints, space implications to each of the decisions. So if you've got a central ventilation system and it's rooftop or whatever, you've got ducts. If you've got a building of any height, vertical shafts rather, that are not small, balancing everything is more complicated. You also have horizontal runs that are not small in corridors that may or may not have adequate head height for all of that. And you've got to get them up and over each other because you've got to supply and return to every unit. So there's a lot of complexity and spatial implications to a central system versus the individual where, yes, you have a closet in your unit, but it really simplifies the ductwork. But it does add 2 penetrations for every single unit. So there's that to contend with. And then the last piece I would say is that filters need to be changed, service needs to happen. A lot of property managers are really not thrilled to have to go into every single unit 4 times a year or whatever. I'm not a mechanical engineer, but whatever the right protocol is to change those filters. Way more convenient to go up to the roof, no one's being interrupted, and you change a few filters. So.
Great. So switching gears a little bit, back to the conversation around all of the sort of proliferation of greening and performance standards that we see happening at different levels at the state and local municipalities. Zoe's asking a question about how we see this aligning with Passive House and some struggles that she's had as it relates to the Passive House project she's working on, where she's still feeling like there's a lot of duplicative requirements in addition to the commitment that they're making around Passive House needing to prove compliance with a lot of other greening or performance standards in addition, and seeing that as sort of additional hurdles that have to be overcome versus just being able to focus on the Passive House performance side of things. So a specific question about whether we're seeing City of Boston specifically or any of the municipalities really sort of acknowledging this and trying to streamline things.
I can start with that one. It's a great question because it is really the lay of the land right now is that we're seeing on the community level, whether it's the City of Boston and other cities and towns, like I mentioned with Cambridge and Somerville, who are implementing Passive House as some component. They're all layering on top of these existing policies, whether they're local or state. So most of them are incorporated through some type of zoning ordinances. That's what they can control. So that's where we're seeing it most common. And then you have the state level, which is doing things through say the code. But then you have pre-existing requirements, whether they're for LEED buildings or other requirements that cities have. So in regards to the City of Boston and what they're doing, what some other towns are doing, is we're seeing Passive House. We're kind of hoping Passive House gets incorporated more is sort of an improved pathway. So you can go down the Passive House route, become a certified project, do the Passive House required modeling, and sort of bypass some of the other requirements. So for example, in the City of Boston, they do that with their zero energy buildings requirement through their current design requirements. So for example, if you're a zero energy building, you can have, say, a HERS rater come in, or you can have your Passive House energy modeling. So you don't have to duplicate. That's only one space though. As far as what other cities are doing, maybe others who are working on projects in those places can speak about it, but that doubling up of efforts is something we're trying to minimize. But I think really in a lot of cases, we're in a wait and see approach until the state develops their new zero energy stretch code, which they'll hopefully have drafted by the end of the year. And this is really where we'll see the guidance on the state level as far as what they incorporate. We want Passive House to be a huge part of that. We want Passive House energy modeling to be part of that. We'll see what happens.
mean, and I'll just throw out there that I think there's a lot of work to do in Boston. The only, the word certifiable, which is basically certified, right? So we've gotten to where we only need to certifiably, commit to our building. And we've gotten out of having to do the modeling required for a LEED building by using our passive house modeling. John Dalzell has allowed us to only model.
Oh, really?
The only one way, but between D&D and what little amount of money they put into the deal, and for the amount of oversight that they're trying to have, I think it's like heartache every day. But I think Aaron's point about trying to, because the beauty about passive house that we may have said is that it's like we don't even need the building department to inspect something to be a passive house. No one needs to know how to do this other than our verifiers, and it's a performance standard. So you either pass it or you fail it. On a credit prescriptive path like LEED or Enterprise Green Communities, there are some elements of those programs that are good for your building, but we manage stormwater because of code. We are creating good indoor air quality, already. We just may not measure it or but we put bike racks in because that's code compliant. There's so many things that are code required. So I would just say that we have to just keep pushing and either it becomes an alternative path that's acceptable so that we can get to this performance-based program as opposed to prescriptive or, a credit-based prescriptive path.
I just would add one small point, which is that totally both of what you've said, I agree with. Passive house is primarily focused on energy, and then you get the indoor air quality and some other great outcomes, but it's agnostic. It doesn't take into account a lot of these other things. So these holistic programs are great, but the major duplicative thing that I see is the energy modeling, right? If LEED requires this and the stretch code requires that, and they're already not the same, different ASHRAE comparison, different year, different, cost versus energy, like that. It's just so confusing. One energy model per project would be ideal.
Well, and we should flag that, in the passive house residential program, you actually are doing 2 energy models. So you are meeting the Energy Star certification requirements. So you are HERS energy modeling as well as your WUFI energy modeling. I think it gets really painful when you start to see requirements around doing ASHRAE 90.1 modeling as well, right? And that's where there's, we've got to figure out how to streamline things. To one other point, just on the sort of broader green certifications versus this performance-based program, I think, the city of Cambridge has taken a really interesting approach to this, where they did a quantitative analysis of all of the projects that came in showing compliance with Article 22 through their LEED certification program. And what they found was that, compliance with LEED wasn't actually driving project teams to do much more than they would have done otherwise because of other ordinances or zoning around some of those other greening issues. So to the point that was made earlier, especially municipalities that have requirements around things like stormwater and density, and where you're getting a lot of the other benefits beyond energy performance, they sort of looked at this and said, okay, we're not necessarily getting a lot more than we would otherwise by requiring LEED in addition to passive house. So that's why we'll provide it as a total alternative compliance pathway. So I think Cambridge is a good example of a city who's kind of looked at this very carefully and made some interesting decisions around trying to streamline things. All right, so we've got another question from Jason about getting the team to work together productively. So how are you doing that? What is the process of training and incentivizing contractors? Are you directing them towards certification programs that they need to be taking in order to be sort of knowledgeable about how to do this well? Are there incentives for them to do it well? How are you really getting that sort of collaboration and teamwork to happen productively?
I'll start talking about the incentives and then let Michelle or Julie address how they're doing this on a project basis with their teams. But there are certifications. So the two big passive house certification bodies, FIAS and PHI, Passive House Institute, both have contractor level certifications. So the FIAS has the Certified Passive House Builder, and the PHI certification has the Certified Passive House Tradesperson. These both apply to general contractors and construction trades who go for these certifications. So these are programs that you can encourage your GCs and your subs to take. They're multi-day programs. They have tests, just like the Certified Passive House Consultant training does, that many designers take. So these are actual trainings that folks can take. And through the MassSave training program, Massachusetts-based folks or people who work in Massachusetts, so even if they live, say, in New England but commute here to work on projects, they can get 50% off of these courses through MassSave. So great reimbursement there for them. In addition to that, there's lots of trainings we're trying to provide through this Passive House training program that address the trades, address contractors. It's always, for us, been historically kind of the hardest group to reach. I think, they work very hard on a lot of projects. It's harder for them to maybe take time off and attend some of these sessions. It's been a harder thing to do, but we've been trying to do more construction-oriented courses. So there are some sessions in our video library you can watch about contractors. We do have a builder and contractor workshop on July 1st. So you can see details on our website, recommend folks to attend that. That's one avenue. So that's the incentives and the trainings that we're providing. Michelle and Julie want to talk about how they're communicating this with the GC themselves.
Yeah, I guess I'll say that as the Mass CEC incentives were conceived, there was language that suggested that the builders should be certified. And what we quickly realized is that there wasn't enough availability to do that we couldn't get them certified fast enough. There weren't enough programs. And also, it's a big deal for a builder to take a full week off and go sit in a classroom. And it is totally worth it, but it's not easy. So we had to rethink it a little bit as we were going through Finch and our current project at Harbor Village. And what I've come to realize, which is really not rocket science, it's like if you're learning Chinese, but you're not using it every day, then are you really going to hold on to it? Or if I'm learning Revit, but I'm not using it every day, am I going to hold on to it? And the same is true. If you go through this week-long program, but you have zero place to apply the information and test it while your head is just fomenting with thought. Yeah, you're going to learn some things for sure, but I don't think that it's as valuable as actually for the builders, the people in the field. They need to put it to application straight away. They need to understand what we need relative to what they're doing on this project. They're looking at this project. And so we really focus on each project. Every one of them has had a different builder so far. The next one is a different builder yet. None of them was Passive House certified when we started, except for the one we're about to start. And I think that just being able to explain again, because they're tradespeople, craft matters. You don't have to hammer home all of the building science of Passive House for everybody. Some people need that, and other people just need to understand how their role plugs in to the whole and how to do it well, and how to give them the tools to understand to do it well at scale and make it replicable. So if what we've designed is complicated, or the products we're using take a lot of pieces to put them together, you're never going to be able to have success at scale. So we've got to work together for them to help us understand what is easy for them, and for us to detail it accordingly.
Yeah, and I would just throw out there that what we did was we created a training through our Rater Verifier CPHC, and if you were going to submit on the RFP to be our GC, you had to spend half a day. You could send your estimator, you could send whoever, but somebody from your office. And a lot of the companies actually sent more than one person to that training. And that was the way they were able to submit an RFP. And I think one of the things about the market transformation we're trying to have here is that the training's happening. Like we're not, we don't want to throw the drawings over the fence and say, good luck. You know, we want to provide the diagnostic testing. We want the verifier out there doing training. You know, we want to really establish the 3-week look ahead and the passive house meetings. We have a passive house meeting every other week on our project to find out what's coming up. When do people need to be on site to see things? So I think it's inherent because we're trying to, you know, you're still swinging the hammer from the same end, but maybe we want you to hit the nail a little softer, you know, like it's happening because of us trying to move the market. So if you know, if you're looking to get trained, there's lots of opportunities for that and incentives for doing those courses. But I agree with Michelle that, you know, we owners, architects, we have a lot to learn from the builders out there. And I think just having this process this way it happens.
Great. So we have just a few minutes left in the Q&A portion. I think we've actually made it through all of the posted questions. I have sort of a final question for each of you I'm hoping to finish up on. And that is, you know, a lot of the folks that are listening to this recording are affordable housing developers / owners, right? Project managers, folks who might be starting to embark or think about embarking on their first passive house project. And so maybe they're sort of in the early stages of design or even have gone through design and are just about to embark on construction. And if you're putting on your sort of like project management developer hat, you know, what are the things, hindsight 2020, looking back on your first group of projects that you would want them to know now and to think really proactively about and to understand to try and avoid some of the hurdles or challenges that maybe you faced on your first projects?
There were no challenges, so I don't really know what you're talking about. So streamlined. Yeah, so many, it's where to begin. But I think that's sort of the whole focus of my presentation. Number one, people have to be committed. I don't care who's on the team. If you are not committed and you have people dragging their feet who don't really think you can get there or don't really get it, you're just wasting your time. That's not useful. People have to be willing to take the leap. A lot of people, it's a leap. They haven't done it yet. But if they believe in it and they want to try, I think attitude is hugely important. We can't just assume we need people with experience because we just don't have enough experience. We got to keep building the experience. And if you're going to do that, you have to be able to see a good attitude and be ready to help walk together and figure it out. I think that's one thing. I also think if you don't have an experienced team, you would benefit strongly from a consultant who does have that experience. I mean, we keep learning every project we're learning on, but I've only done 3. So 3 is not a lot, right? And if you're not working with a design firm that's got a lot of experience, make sure you have a consultant that's going to be able to help you and is able to offer that wisdom and experience, because there's so many lessons learned. Don't waste time like learning lessons that we've already learned. Just find the right community who can help you. That's where I'd stop, I guess.
I think when I try to sell passive house, since we, you know, are building our first one, but we've designed a few, is that, you know, it doesn't necessarily take more money. It just takes a lot of time. I mean, we're talking about, you know, 3-hour collaborative meetings where we've got a whiteboard out or trace or whatever, and we're working through details, trying to get the details right. And then, you know, we're meeting, you know, we've got our own passive house meeting where we spend an hour and a half or 2 hours going through, you know, what's coming up. So it's going to be more time consuming. I don't imagine any of them are ever going to not be time consuming, because all these buildings will look a little differently and be detailed differently. But it doesn't have to cost more. It just takes more time.
Yeah, I'll just add some of the things I've heard from teams and from running these trainings is that the biggest thing is you're not reinventing the wheel here. This is going to be your first project, maybe the GCs and everyone on the team's first project, but it's not the first passive house out there. To Michelle's point, bringing in folks who are experienced with this, who know what they're doing, can help. but looking at the existing ones that are there. There's affordable projects that have been done at almost no cost premium to market rate projects. There's large scale ones and small scale ones. There's all types of things out there. There are things to learn from. And echoing what I think both Julie and Michelle has said, is just bring your team together early, being dedicated to doing it right. And echoing the thing Michelle said about craft matters. That's really the component of passive house. In many cases, passive house building is not doing anything special. It's just making sure every detail is done really well.
Great. Thank you all. So Emily, I'll turn it over to you for announcements.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron and Michelle and Julie, so much. This has been great. Yeah, we just have a few announcements. I think I'm going to turn it over to Bev first, and then to give a couple Mass Clean Energy Center related opportunities that are on the radar for affordable housing organizations. So I'll have Bev just give a quick update, and we can share materials related to that in an email after as well.
And so this has been an amazing discussion, and you guys, if you haven't talked to our speakers before, reach out to them. And Passive House Mass is a wonderful place to hear from other peers about what they're learning, and making sure you don't make the mistakes that Michelle was talking about making yourself, like learn from what other people have done. And because we did fund, or we are funding 8 different projects, we also at Mass DEC have a lot of lessons. So, you know, being more specific about the incremental cost question, 6 of the 8 have given us pre-construction numbers, and the incremental cost is between 1.4% and 2.8% on all of those projects. And that's, you know, that $3,000 per unit that Mass Save is going to give you may not cover that whole amount, but there's a lot of benefits here. And what we are finding on the costs is the highest cost by far for every project has been bringing fresh air to every bedroom. That is a health benefit after COVID, that if we are spending any more money on any of these projects, we should be spending. So I think, and we're going to find these costs fall. You know, this extra time and coordination doing it the first time, it gets easier and easier the more people have experience here. And I think we're already finding that in some of the projects where there's repeat subs, or architects who are doing it more than one time, more and more people getting education. And I will say, project managers, think about getting certification yourself, either the builder's training or the certified passive house consultant. Mass Save does pay half of that. It's a big commitment, but like, it is one of the better things to have in your back pocket for knowledge around building science that I could possibly imagine. So 2 announcements. Mass DEC has 2 funding opportunities that I just want to make sure you guys know about. One is called Empower, and it is really aimed at community organizations who are very active in their communities. And the goal is to really reduce the energy burden on residents in like environmental justice communities. And so, of course, the organizations you guys all represent are fantastic applicants. We actually have something called a capacity building grant. So if you're interested in looking at low-income community solar for your neighborhood, or targeting multifamily building owners to make sure that they fully take advantage of the Mass Save program, or heat pumps, installing a few example heat pump homes in your neighborhood so that you have ambassadors to show people what a heat pump looks like. A whole bunch of ideas. It could be anything really, but these capacity building grants are between $5,000 and $25,000, and it's mainly for you to do the research to figure out what would be the best thing in your community. If you haven't heard about this, we have a couple webinars that were recorded. Feel free to check out Mass DEC's website. Again, it's called Empower, EMPOWER, and I'll put the link in, and I think Emily will send it out as well. And then on a similar note, there's something called, and that is rolling. And the capacity building grants is like the first step. If you haven't thought about a project, there are grants that are actually for implementation. So say you're very active in community organizing and you have staff that do community organizing. This is up to $150,000. It can pay for staff to help do implement these ideas. So, and it could be, you know, a new staff person. It could be, you know, a part-time person for 3 years to do something, but we do have money to do some of this work as well. And then there's another opportunity called Act for All, which is related to transportation and environmental justice. And sort of reducing pollution related to environmental justice in environmental justice communities related to transportation. So that's due September 7th. Empower is a rolling application, but I would encourage all of you to take a look at it if you haven't before. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bev. And thank you for your leadership on the Passive House Design Challenge. We know that's been transformational. So I'm going to turn it over to Brooks Winner from MAPC next, who's going to talk a little more about the ARC program. And just to give a plug also, this energy cohort session, we're able to put this on with the help of the MAPC ARC program. So I'm going to have Brooks talk a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And so the ARC program that Emily mentioned is it's some funding that we have from the Department of Energy Resources through their Affordable Access Regional Coordination grants that they gave to a bunch of regional planning agencies around the Commonwealth. And our work is kind of focusing on two separate pathways. One is the work that Emily is doing with this cohort on looking at clean energy opportunities for multifamily buildings. And then MAPC is leading a series of trainings that we're coordinating for later this year, probably sometime in the fall, that's really focused on connecting with low and moderate income homeowners and renters in smaller buildings. But some of the folks that you might be connecting with through other kind of community-based programs, folks that may not be living in buildings that you own or manage, but other folks in your communities. So we're going to be connecting with folks from various CDCs, particularly interested in gateway cities in and around the Boston area, but really looking at sort of developing trainings that look at both the barriers to access clean energy, solar energy efficiency for folks in 1 to 4, 1 to 5 unit buildings, and also kind of gathering information about the resources that are available to folks with low or moderate incomes in the region, and having conversations about what CDCs and CAP agencies and municipal governments and other local partners can be doing to break down some of those barriers for folks in their communities. So if anybody's interested, I'll pass along the information on those trainings to Emily and Don, who have been really helpful in thinking through who to connect with. And but if anybody is super interested and wants to have a conversation with me and my team about what you would like to learn about, I think some of the conversations that we're having with folks over the summer are going to inform the content of those trainings and what we really focus on. So feel free to reach out. I'll put my my email in the chat, and stay tuned for more details about those trainings coming soon.
Awesome.
And thanks, Emily.
Thank you so much, Brooks. We just have a few other announcements, and then we can open it up too if folks have any other announcements. We are working on Mass Save advocacy right now. So the 3-year plan, which governs like $2+ billion every 3 years, we want to make sure it has adequate resources for the affordable housing community. And particularly, we have our eyes set on deep energy retrofit funding, or a pilot program that would mirror the success of the Passive House new construction program, and then really focus on existing buildings and retrofitting them to deep, real low carbon buildings. So that's kind of where we're at. We would love, I know many of you have already signed on letters of support. I know POA and NOAA, among others, are partners in this. So we'll share the support letter in a follow-up email, and would love to have as many of you sign on as possible, and would love to hear folks' feedback and input as well. And even if you're interested in giving public comment, we can share some of those sessions that are coming up. Just a couple other things. We're thinking about a Slack channel to help create a little more participation among all of our energy cohort teams. So would love to hear from all of you if that's something you're interested in, you're opposed to. But we really just want to have this be a real like participatory learning group where we can share promising practices and lessons learned and things not to do as we're going through into this new frontier of passive house, deep energy retrofits and beyond. So that's something that we just want to put on your radar, and we'll share more information about that probably in July. And the last announcement I had is our July 15th meeting. If that's the next energy cohort meeting, that will be on the nexus of like a historic preservation project and passive house. We're going to have Heather Clark from the Rocky Mountain Institute give that, and I think it's going to be a really cool project. It's Moran Square in Fitchburg, and it has historic tax credits involved. Like there's a lot of moving parts. So would love to have all of you join us for that. We'll send out the registration link shortly. So I think that's all I had, and all of the recording from today will be shared along with the slides. But do folks have any other announcements or last questions? We've got 5 minutes, so people can either use the raised hand function, or you can unmute yourself and give your announcement related to the energy things that are going on that are relevant to the energy cohort. Anyone else? No, well, if folks have ideas, please, oh, go ahead, Bev, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I think this session really covered the mechanics of, and some of the things you need to do about passive house, and we talked a lot about incremental cost up front. There was some discussion that Julie made about hot water operating costs if it's all electric. So I just want to be clear, if you go passive house, you don't have to go all electric. So all 8 of the passive house design challenge projects actually have central, well, they're not all necessarily central, some are semi-central hot water systems that use gas right now. But I think what we're finding is a lot of them are planning ahead for when that equipment dies, how to replace it. And hopefully at that time, we won't see this mismatch between the price of gas and electric the way we do temporarily right now. I do think that's going to change quite a bit, but Julie's right. Like if she put in all electric central hot water, it would be quite a bit more expensive on an annual operating cost. And I know Boston is pushing otherwise, but I don't know, maybe hopefully we'll see some changes in either incentives or the pricing going forward in the future. The other thing I want to say is, you know, the front end is one thing, but does this actually deliver the energy savings we're talking about? People are a little bit skeptical sometimes, but we would expect from the modeling that passive house multifamily should perform between 40 and 60% better than stretch code. And so we at Mass DEC have been running through a bunch of projects in other states, and Aaron had some of that data up, and the distillery is one good example, but we are confirming it is 40 to 60% better than stretch code. And actually it's very easy in energy disclosure ordinance areas to sort of compare, right? And actually what we find is those tend to be urban areas. And like Michelle was talking about, you don't have to do that much in an urban area to get to a lot of high levels of LEED on the envelope. And so we are seeing actually passive house usually is about 50% better energy use intensity than LEED in enterprise green communities. And it sort of makes sense, right? I mean, LEED really only 30% of the points are energy. There's a lot of really important stuff in that certification, but it's not really focused on energy. And lower energy use doesn't necessarily mean a lot lower cost. Again, gas is really cheap right now. So you can't just say it's going to be 40 to 60% less expensive to run, but you are going to position yourself well for communities that are starting to require like in Boston, and we're going to see this in Cambridge too, where they're going to start ratcheting down your emissions, your greenhouse gas emissions. If you build new construction passive house on every frontier, you're not going to have to retrofit that building. Like the last thing you want to do is build something now that you have to retrofit in 10 years, right? So that's another really good benefit of building for passive from the beginning.
So Bev, thanks for the plug around the concepts of electrification. So that is something that we have on our radar for the energy cohort and diving into deeper this fall. So everyone should keep their eyes out for sessions and symposium that are specifically focused on these questions around electrification of systems.
And new is different than retrofit, right? I think electrification's not that hard in new construction except around hot water. But retrofitting, it gets tough. And there's a lot of, only ifs that you're going to want to do it. So.
And it's evolving a lot right now. We're seeing, new systems coming onto the market. We're seeing hybrid approaches to try and, mitigate some of the impacts of operating costs. So there's a lot moving and shaking around electrification right now. And we're excited to engage with you all around that, coming this fall.
Awesome. Well, thank you again to everybody, to our presenters, to all of you for participating. We really appreciate your time, and we'll share all these materials, and we hope to see you again on July 15th for our next session. So thank you, and hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead.
Thanks, everybody. Good to be here.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.